Welcome everyone. I see that you guys are coming in. We will give it about 1 minute. The numbers are going up, so that means everyone is logging in. And I will give a few housekeeping rules before we start our formal conversation. Okay, we'll give it 1 more minute and we will begin. Thank you everyone for joining. Hi, Felicia Banks from North Carolina. Thank you for giving us a shout out. Okay, well, we will get started. Welcome everyone. We are excited to have you with us today. A few housekeeping acknowledgements before we begin. Today's webinar is being recorded. For questions to be addressed to our panelists, please submit your questions only via the Q&A box and not through the chat box. We will try to acknowledge and address as many questions as time permits. And I do know that there were some questions sent with your registration. I will try to address those also that were previously sent in. Today, June 18th, marks the 67th wedding anniversary of Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King Jr., who were married on June 18th, 1953, on the lawns of Coretta's parents' home in Marion, Alabama. In response to recent events and in honor of Coretta Scott King and how her love, advocacy, and leadership in the civil rights movement of the 60s have impacted all of our communities today. 60 years later, the Black community is still fighting to change conditions for African Americans to live freely and love without risk. History and recent current events sparked the interest of founder of World Bride, Meredith Leon McCormick. She motivated her team to create an online panel event and to invite the Black wedding publishing industry leading women and men to have a conversation on how COVID-19 and the recent protests have impacted their businesses. The panelists will also discuss how they are pivoting to ensure business survival in an industry that is white male dominated and showcases only the concerns and issues of white women. For so many years, Black women have not been included in the pages of mainstream media. The bridal industry is no exception. Today's webinar and panel is presented to you by and moderated by Meredith Leon McCormick, founder of World Bride Magazine and MLM Represents, and co-hosted and moderated by myself, Tara Melvin, founder of Perfect Planning Events and the Signature CEO Conference. The conference will engage heavy-hitting media figures on their contributions to the publishing and bridal markets and learn how they plan to bridge the gap in an industry that generates $78 billion in the United States annually, yet leaves Black women out of the dark with only a few publications featuring Black women on their covers, on their pages, and in advertisements. We will be doing part 1 of today's webinar with an informative conversation with the lovely Mikki Taylor and Meredith Leon McCormick. But first, just let me tell you about my co-host. Meredith Leon McCormick, with over 20 plus years in the industry, is one of the most sought after branding experts with her firm MLM Represents, and is the editorial director of World Bride magazine. She drives the magazine into the 21st century, where visions of people of color are seen in a more positive and progressive direction. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Meredith Leon McCormick.
Wow, I'm impressed. You said that so nicely. Thank you. I'm honored. So I want to first acknowledge that my executive producer, Mr. Andrew Babb, is the one that brought the title to us, Bridal Can Do Better, based on a post that he saw on a LOHO, League of Her Own bridal salon in San Francisco and Los Angeles, had made, inviting the bridal industry to do better. And I had an opportunity to speak to her. And so this is where this conversation is inspired by. So I want to tell him thank you for that. Secondly, we could not have this conversation without first acknowledging those that came before us and paved the way to give us the courage to do what we are doing now. And we hope we're doing it justice, as they have taught us and set the example and the tone for excellence, you know, on across the board. And so I was speechless and so grateful when Miss Mikki Taylor agreed to do this, because I know this is a topic close and dear to her heart. She is an author of 3 books, Self-Seduction and Commander-in-Chic, and her very latest is Editor-in-Chic, which I have a copy of, and one of our lucky brides is going to be a winner of the book. We're going to give to a lucky bride. And so for me, this conversation with you, Mikki, as an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and executive producer, a TV personality, you know, and just my mentor. You have taken many of my calls crying and not quite understanding what to do, how to do it, and how to manage this industry that has looked like it's inviting to us, but yet we were excluded from so much of it. But yet you gracefully did it, that I foolishly thought that I can do it without a problem, until I got full-fledged into it, realizing, oh my God, this is not easy at all. Doors were getting slammed, doors were or gently getting slammed, and trying to figure out, if I can't get in through the front door, how do I get in through the back door, the side door, the window, the roof? But my goal was to get into the room and to still hold my head up high. So for me, can you briefly tell people about your entrance into the publishing world?
Sure. And Meredith, thank you so much. It's such an honor to talk with you today, and the various leaders that you are bringing to the table to talk about this issue. How can the bridal industry do better? You know, I entered publishing, you know, I guess you could say it was in my DNA. I entered it through fashion and beauty. Certainly my mother had a background working with the late American icon that was Sarah Vaughan. She was hairstylist, makeup artist, and wardrobe gal, and what have you to her. But more importantly, just coming of age in Newark, New Jersey, in the Black community, and understanding the power of us, understanding the power of purchase, understanding that beauty was in fact our most emotional purchase, understanding what love and relationships meant in the Black community, that for us, the wedding day was not only one of the most amazing days in our lives, but it was a day of legacy, because it was each where we began a story, you know, seated in 3 words, I love you, but for generations to come. And so when I entered Essence magazine, you know, interestingly enough, Essence was the only magazine talking directly to Black women about every aspect of their lives: love, relationships, beauty, fashion, careers, and what have you. And one of the things that I remember, the edict at Essence was, we put this magazine out for and about ourselves. And, you know, if I were looking for a nugget today, a golden nugget or a genesis to what makes a magazine succeed, is that you really have to understand who the audience is and what they need to know. to engage them. It's not rocket science. And so I sat at the desk in the role as beauty editor and then beauty and cover director for 30 years, from 1980 to 2010. And then I became editor at large for the publication, speaking for us, 2 Black women at our live events. But throughout, you know, it was really about informing, affirming, and inspiring us. That was my daily work. And every day I came to work for the reader, not for a company. And I think that that's critical if we look at the bridal industry, that service is really at the heart of this, and who you serve and how you engage them. That will not change. In fact, it will be ever more pivotal in how we move forward post-COVID-19.
I agree with you. But so what was your gut feeling when you heard they said that publishing print is dead? What did you feel about that, coming from such a strong magazine background?
Well, you know, I always feel that anything that doesn't hold up against the truth has to be dismissed. And so I know for certain is that one can no more pronounce that publishing is dead or print is dead any more than they could announce that books are dead. If I look at my audience for editor-in-chief, my audience has the hardcover, they have the audio version, they have the ebook, and they have the trade paperback, and they have a different relationship with each of those.
Right.
What I know about print, that particularly as it pertains to the African-American audience, we haven't always had images of ourselves. You know, white women can take it for granted. There are a multiplicity of titles on the newsstand that perhaps if they went away today, you know, maybe they would become a successful website. It wouldn't be a deal breaker in their lives, but for Black women, it's very different. The relationship that we have with print journalism, the relationship that we have with narratives, those things that tell our authentic stories, those stories that solve the concerns, the very present concerns in this day and age, the images that we long for to see of ourselves, all shades, shapes, and sizes. You can't tell me that is dead. First of all, because we aren't a trend. Mistake ever to look at Black women as a trend. You know, designers have done that. They would look at Black models as trending. Well, I hope to see the day where that won't be so. So yeah, no, I don't put any validity to that print is dead. I think that what it says in this day and age is that we have to be ever more conscious of what the audience is hungering for, as opposed to what we have the capability of reporting on. There's a distinct difference.
I agree, because I still love the feel and the luxury of holding paper in my hands, my coffee table books. You know, I'm a collector of Asseline's books, so to have a beautiful covered magazine, I still want it at my coffee table because it is part of the decor of my home. So I totally agree with you on that. My next question is, what suggestions would you have for people that are looking to enter into the magazine, the media arena, especially African-American people?
Well, the suggestion I would have for those looking to enter this media, this world, and certainly speak directly to African-American people, I would say come to contribute. I can tell you as an editor, I never hired anyone who wanted a job. I don't knock jobs, but you can get a job anywhere for that matter, if it's just about function and getting paid. If you want to enter this media, particularly where African Americans are concerned, come to contribute. The question is, how can you add value to their lives? And how can you pitch that to the company that you want to work for? Have you studied that company? Have you done your homework? Do you know where you will fit in and what you distinctly bring to the table? Because it's not just enough to want to be in journalism. It's not just enough to want to work there. You have to come to contribute. And if you don't have anything to contribute, then perhaps that's not the place for you, or perhaps this is not the audience, because African Americans are hungry for content that's going to make a seismic shift in our lives, that's going to inspire the most inspired culture in the world. I mean, and that is not braggadocious, that's just a fact.
Right.
If you designers who copy our style on the runway, if you look at different areas in the beauty industry, if you look at the mimicking of our full lips and our bodies and what have you. So if you're going to talk to this audience who has set a high bar for information and where it spends its dwell time, you better be ready to contribute.
And there you have it. So now my next question is, in this day and age of COVID, coronavirus, how can already existing publications that have, like what I was saying, with all the panelists that are here, we have, including Essence, we have over 125 plus years of contributing to the media and addressing the African American and people of color, Latinas, Indian culture, and inspired them. How can they pivot and find their way in the digital age as things move forward?
Well, I think that the first thing is to be conscious of is you definitely want to pivot and not panic. And might I say that it's not just COVID-19. It's not just a COVID-19 pandemic. There is a racism pandemic. There's a sociological pandemic. There's an economic pandemic. So if you want to understand how to reach people where they are and then give them what they never dreamed they wanted, you have to get engaged with them. You have to understand what life is like for them, not what you want to report on. Mm-hmm. There's been a seismic shift in how we engage daily life. And some of the tragedies that have played out before us in the media about being Black in America. So you have to understand the mindset of a culture that has basically stepped back into the 60s. And I can say that being a child of the 60s, having come through the riots, having come through all of that, having watched my parents in the whole Jim Crow era and the narratives that I was taught. I can say that as a mother, having to teach my young African-American son about what he needs to know when he's out in the car or driving to the store for something as simple as a gallon of milk, and why he make it back home. How I'm gonna view how I style after this, how I view what my wedding is going to look like after this, and where it's going to be held, and where my values are now, and where I will spend and where I won't. So in order to, again, you're either irrelevant or you are part of the solution. So what this is really asking now is to an evolution. And right. For those who will get it right, it's going to be a revolution.
Right.
Because again, you're not only going to meet people where they are, you're going to bring them what they never dreamed they wanted. And a lot has happened over the course of the last 90 days. We are not the same. And don't, the worst thing you could do is say, well, let's get back to normal. Because first of all, what we had was not normal. First of all, what we had was not inclusive. And so, I don't want to hear any more diversity and inclusion conversations. It's time to activate diversity and inclusion. It's time to bring the people to the table that you are trying to reach, as opposed to trying to talk to them from the 90th floor and going home to an area where they're not relevant. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and you're going to have to roll your sleeves up and get your elbows out to do it, but it's going to pay off. One of the things I've said is that this moment now is pregnant with opportunity. And if we labor right, we're going to give birth to some amazing successes. So let's not get back to normal. Let's get to better. And now we have an opportunity to do that.
Right. Tara, did you have something you wanted to say? Because I know you.
Yes, I was on mute, getting there. We as African Americans are fighting to survive this pandemic within a pandemic. During these times, I've reflected on your inspirational quote. The question isn't who's going to let me, but who's going to stop me. I think that is so relevant right here and now. How has that resonated with you in sending that message out there to our community?
So, one of the things that is very clear to me, if we look at the protest, if we look at our voices, and that if you look at the fact that people across the world, let alone the nation, are willing to risk their lives in being exposed to those who may have COVID-19 for this cause, that alone tells you that the times are different. That alone gives credence to, it's not a question is who's going to let me, who's going to stop me. And to me, what it has encouraged me to say to us is that, we have to be transformational in our thinking. We have to be relentless now in our determination and clear about what we must have, not what we desire, what we must have. And this can't be a far off dream. We have to accomplish this now.
And you had kind of talked about the 60s and, how things are moving and transgressing now. As far as Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King, today is their wedding anniversary. What are your thoughts about Coretta being a woman, a mother, an advocate, a leader in the civil rights movement?
I do think that Coretta Scott King, who I had the joy of meeting and just spending time in her quiet but majestic presence, I do think that she was sort of what one would call a Proverbs 31 woman. Proverbs 31 talks about the virtuous woman. And so Coretta was all of those things. She was servant to everyone. She was mother to her children. She was wife to the late Dr. Martin Luther King. She was an industrious woman. She saw a prosperous future for Black people, and she worked toward that, and she worked to further his message. And so, what that says to me, people like to talk a lot now about being a multi-hyphenate. Well, she was that. Mm-hmm. She was that. And so we didn't even really need to coin a definition now, because we have examples of many who have come before us who were that. Booker T. Washington said it best. He said, excellence is to do a common thing in an uncommon way. So if we look at all of, not only Coretta, if we look at, we've got example after example of sheroes who walked in many corridors for purpose, for causes to change lives, to bring up another generation that would continue the legacy, to be economically independent, to not be, to understand leadership and servanthood at the same time. So, certainly I just was so moved by her. I was moved by the late Dr. Betty Shabazz, who I also had the pleasure of knowing, and raising her children after watching her husband be assassinated, and understanding the importance of the honor and respect that Black people were due, that we were not a less than, trying to disengage the fact that other cultures, white cultures in particular, in order to feel exalted, had to oppress others to have someone beneath them to do so, and that was not the Creator's way. So yeah, example after example, we've got a template. We've got a template for this.
Thank you so much. And with that, in retrospect, she was 26 years old whenever she got married. And 6 years later, we're still fighting, for a change, for conditions for African Americans to live freely and to love without risk. And that kind of resonated with me. And I never told Meredith this. A couple of weeks ago, I had to go home for a funeral. And my great aunt and uncle, there was a protest in our town, and someone had called us coming from the funeral, that they were getting sick outside, protesting. And so when my sister and I got there to pick them up, they were a little angry that we came to get them. And so I asked them, why were they angry? And they said, as long as we're living and breathing, we will still protest. They're 85 years old. And that just hurt me to know that at 85, you're still trying to fight for the rights of our community, of your kids, of your grandkids, great grandkids, people that are coming along behind you. Do you feel that this time around that there's going to be a change?
I do feel that this time around there's going to be a change. I mean, I think if you look at the protests, they look different. If you look at who's linking arms and aims with us, if you look back at the 60s, it was just us marching for us. If you look at the visual of those who marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge versus those who marched across the Brooklyn Bridge a few weeks ago, you can tell that this time we won't take no for an answer, because others have linked arms and aims with us, in that this is inhumane, in that we will not carry the old evil ways forward any longer, that they are anathema to multicultural people. So yes, I do believe that this time will be different.
And that brings me up to the comment about Miss Brianna Taylor, who was murdered in her home. And I had the opportunity to hear her mother, Tamika, talk about the pain of not seeing her daughter, her daughter's body, for at least 4 hours, you know, just going back and forth with the police, denial to get access. And then it brought to mind, you know, Dr. King, Coretta Scott King got married at 26. This young lady died at 26, you know, and it feels like there's this parallel. You know, why are we back here again where you're not even safe in your own home? It's bad enough as Black women, we're not even acknowledged in the presence, you know, and we weren't even allowed to get married, and that's a whole other show. But now we are, you know, getting married. We're still not being seen. And she died March. It's still nothing is happening on her behalf, you know, but I know you for years has done nothing but celebrate and tell Black women, Black girls, they were beautiful, they were worthy, they were honorable. You know, what are your feelings about this whole young lady and her family dealing with this? What's your message?
Certainly as a Black woman, let alone a mother to 2 daughters, my heart just sunk that her daughter was not safe in her bed. When they broke into her house, you know, I have heard the stories from my elders. When I think back to the movie Loving and that brutal scene where they break into the house, to have someone break into your home where you lock the doors and you close your eyes thinking that you can trust the rest, and to happen. And then as a mother to show up and you can't even get through. You're giving all kinds of information, almost like being played off, that this could happen in 2020. But what I say to us is that we must define this era differently. We must be relentless. We must, yes, talk to our daughters, but we must also have them take up the cause. And we must not let law, the politicians, everyone, because everyone to me that holds office is designed to protect and serve us. I don't just attribute that to law enforcement. I attribute that to my mayor. I attribute that to my governor, to state assemblyman, all the way up to the top, that everyone who is there to protect and serve us is accountable for doing that job. And I think that we really have to make them uncomfortable, so much so that they either honor the sign or they step away from the position. And we have to be relentless. And it's probably going to get a lot uglier before it gets better. But this is how we get to the other side of this. Because in my lifetime, I don't want to see another Brianna Taylor being robbed of her life in her home, in her sleep. I don't want to see another young man gun hunted like Ahmaud Arbery, or stalked, if you will. I don't want to see a Rashad Brooks. I don't want to see a George Floyd, not in my lifetime. What that says to me on my watch, that I take this responsibly, that all of us have to be engaged in this. that we have to hold up Brianna's mother and everyone else in the fight as if it is our own, because the reality of it is, it is.
It is. It really is. So my other question to you is, as entrepreneurs, because the other half of the amazing women that are now taking up the torch from what you started, they are now celebrating Black love, Black beauty, Black families. What recommendations do you have for them, not to pick up the torch of trying to emulate white standards, but how do they still fit in working with other brands and collaborating with other brands, still be true to their community, their culture, and not allow Black women in any other culture to be dismissed?
You know, the reality of it is, you have to know your value. Self-perception colors your entire life. How you live, how you teach others to honor you, how you honor yourself, how you honor the culture, and your role in upholding the truth of who we are. Emulation is a word that I think that we should do away with, except when it comes to good manners and things like that. But as far as how we tell our story is so valuable in and of itself. Stick to the genesis. Don't emulate. Be authentic. Tell the truth. That's what we did. You know, when I editor on the pages at Essence Magazine, it was about telling our story. It was about talking about our authentic beauty, all shades, shapes, and sizes. It was talking about our hair texture, not trying to get it to emulate someone else's hair texture or to anything that would deny the truth of who God had created. So if we stick with the authenticity of who we are, first of all, there is much to celebrate. If we just stick with that, that is an endless narrative. If you look at, even in my role as cover director, we put celebrities on the cover and women who had what I call celebrity. For example, Ray Thornton on the cover. She was this beautiful young Black woman who was HIV positive. And we told the story that this is what it looks like, so that there wouldn't be even this prejudice that, oh, it only to gay men. Not so. Equal opportunity, effect. So, authenticity. We put a gang girl on the cover once who talked about what gang life was like for her, and not to glorify it, but why she went that route and when she pivoted, because it was information.
Right.
And we knew also that she wasn't going to give any untested advice. Again, that goes back to authenticity. So the stories are there. If we just tell our story, why would we ever emulate something that doesn't have anything to do with the truth of who we are?
Wow.
Success is not built on falsehoods.
Mm-hmm.
And not be. Success is built on authenticity. And what I say to those of us who are in positions to tell our story, master the purpose with distinction. Don't emulate. Don't do what worked for someone else. The grass is not greener on the other side. You got a whole harvest in front of you. Seize it.
And go ahead, Mary.
As an editor, writing and trying to create content for the next generation, the Gen Zs, it's hard trying to come up with something that both we teach and help them to move forward. So for me, what advice do you want to give as we create content for the next generation of publishers?
Well, one of the things that I want to say, if we look at the next generation of publishers, again, engage. Listen more than you talk. In fact, don't talk when you should listen. Because what I know from all of my years in publishing is that if you really want to be effective in reaching any generation, is that you have to be a good listener to what their lives are like and what's important to them. Because that's how you serve well. Secondly, I want to say, realize that particularly as it pertains to Black culture, that everything old isn't antiquated. There are some foundational values that we don't want to discard. Because if we do, the more you allow history to erase you, there will come that time when no one knows who you are, not even you. So, and be consistent. You know, don't, you know, one month you're putting out a magazine that looks like this and it's talking to this generation, and the next month it's talking to someone else and it looks completely different. Don't become confusion. Be consistent. Set the standard. Be that destination brand that consumers can't live without, because you are core, you are essential to their lives. And that's not hard if you listen, if you pay attention, if you understand your audience and how to engage them.
Oh, thank you so much. Tara, do you have any last?
No, thank you for sharing all of your pearls of wisdom with us today. This has definitely been a pleasure for me to listen to you, to meet you virtually. So thank you so much for, you know, sharing with us today. Did you have any other closing remarks that you wanted to give to the audience?
I think, yes, one thing that I would just say again, and it bears repeating, that we have to be transformational in our thinking and relentless in our determination, that we need to stay connected with that which is important and that which seems impossible. Because, and it's going to take us out of our comfort zones, but that's when we're going to soar in our power zone. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because that's what the elders did. They were willing to step out of their comfort zone to live in their power zone. So that's what I say to us. May each of us wake up every day excited to be who we are and what we bring to the table.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mikki. Your last 3 points that I got was, it is necessary for us to pivot in crisis time, in the time of crisis, brand connection, and create content that informs and inspires in 2020 and 2021 and beyond.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct. And stay engaged with who you desire to serve.
Thank you. I know you have another meeting, so you got to run. I love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Oh, wait, one more thing. Please tell us, where can we buy your book? Where can we buy your book?
Yes, you can buy Editor in Chief on Amazon.com and any of the .coms that you like to shop at, perhaps Barnes & Noble, what have you. But Amazon.com, you can get the book in all its incarnations.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.